Today we are jumping right into our new unit, which I have entitled Changing Minds, because this is a period of time in which, well, people's minds are changing. There's different revolutions that come about that change the way that people think about society, the way people think about religion, the rest of the world, and how we think about the world around us and how we relate to other people. This is a fairly large time period, about 400 years between the 1300s and the late 1700s. So it's not like all of these things happened all at once, but when we look back at it in history, we can see that they really are revolutionary. They really are changing the ways that people think in a totally new and different way. And we're going to be looking at kind of the central question as we go forward. How do people respond to change? Because this is a time period full of change in the way that people think, this one will be a fairly easy question to answer. But the cool thing is, it's also a question we can still answer today. And it's a question that pops up other times in history as well. How do people respond to change, if we want to use a modern day example, with being isolated? How do people respond to change when they can't go out and do their daily lives? So this is something that we can look at in history to use as examples to help answer that question even now. And because of that, we'll be looking at a lot of causes and effects. And more importantly, probably these three things in order. First, causes. What was the cause of this event? Two, what were the effects or influences that this event had? And then three, what was the response? How did people respond to those different changes? And sometimes those responses even become a new cause in of themselves and therefore are connected to all kinds of other things happening in the world. So keep that series in mind as we keep going forward. I'll try to refer back to it myself as well. So first off, we're starting off with the Renaissance. This is the first revolution that we'll be going over, covering the times roughly 1300s to 1600s. It's a really long time period, and there's all kinds of different stages that happen in it, but we're going to be looking at the general outcomes of the Renaissance as a whole. And the Renaissance was essentially just a rebirth of Europe, and it was a time of finding culture, creating new types of art, and thinking more about politics and economics. And it can essentially be traced back to these three main causes. I tried to find a way to make it A, B, C, so that I could say that the ABCs caused the Renaissance, but I could not find any word for trade that started with an A. So if you have an idea, leave it down below, and I will be very happy if so. But we can keep going and say these three: trade, crusades, and the Black Death. First off, the Crusades exposed Europe to old and new ideas. The Crusades were essentially military campaigns from all across Europe, down across through the Byzantine Empire, into Turkey, Syria, Jerusalem, and the Middle East. And in crossing all of these different regions and cultures, you have ideas being brought back as people return into Europe. You have, from Greece and Rome, pre-Christian Greek philosophies, so ideas of thinking about the world before the Christian church had been established, as well as architecture and literature. And from the Islamic world, you have learning and medicine, There was all kinds of advancements in education and teaching and medicine and even surgery that came out of the Islamic Empire, which when Europe was there and brought back, they were able to learn more and develop and become a better organized society because of these new ideas. You also have more trade and trade goods. Because the Crusades had put more of Europe in contact with other parts of the world, you have better trade connections. And here you can see all the different trade routes and the Silk Road that we talked about already. And you have the development of all kinds of luxury trade goods as well. You have silk and spices being brought in that the Europeans are absolutely dying for, and gold. You have a lot of wealth that is being brought in because of all of these luxury trade goods and people who are moving in and out and buying things. And so this is the third and most macabre reason for the Crusade, or for the Renaissance to actually happen, the Black Death. And this was because of, the Black Death or bubonic plague that completely decimated Europe's population. Roughly 25 million people, or 1/3 of Europe's total population, was now dead because of this disease. And it essentially was a reset button for all of Europe. Now you have wealth that's more equally divided among people. Rather than there being 40 or 50 people in one small area, now you maybe had 20. And so the same amount of money may be coming in, but because there's less people around to have to share that with, everyone gets a little bit more, and it's more equally divided amongst more of the population. And because of the Renaissance, you have ultimately a secular movement. You have focus on life in the here and now instead of looking at the past or looking forward to the future. You're trying to decide, what is my life like right now at this moment, and what can I do to improve my life here and now? So you have better thinking about how to set up government, how to rule and make laws, and how to make money and have a good market. You have a lot more education, and people are spending time on learning the Greek and Roman classics, which puts less reliance on the church and religion, because now you're studying something other than the Bible to learn about the world. Also, if you're thinking about the here and now, you're not thinking about the future. You're not thinking about the afterlife, which is what the church functioned as a lot of. The church is what gives you hope for, or was what gave you hope for the afterlife. And if people aren't thinking about that, well, they're not reliant on the church for feeling security in their life. With all of the money that's coming in, you also have time to dedicate to art and reading and discussing these things. You can't spend time debating philosophy if you have to spend all day farming. But if you have a lot of money, you can do that. What came out of the Renaissance? Primarily, you have the philosophy of humanism. This is a way of thinking that celebrated the individual, as well as human achievements, the human form, nature, and Greek and Roman literature. You have a focus on people's problems, how they fix them, what they look like. You have a lot more sculptures and art that reflect that, as well as the ways that people think about the world. You have new art and you have new architecture that also came out of the Renaissance, as well as, if you can see these two stars here, two important ones that will pop up very, very soon. Lots of technological advances and lots of money coming into Europe, which allow Europe to be successful both on its own and on the world stage. Here you can see the differences between medieval and Renaissance art. Here on the left, you can see the figures look really flat. They're trying to shade, but it just doesn't look quite right. And the baby looks like he's 30 years old. Whereas with the Renaissance, they are very much influenced by humanism. You have people looking at humans to draw and paint, making things more lifelike. So the baby, thankfully, looks a little bit more like a baby. You have Greek and Roman architecture with columns, arches, domes, and lots of circles. This is the Duomo in Florence, which is one of the very pinnacle things of Renaissance architecture. And in painting and drawing, you have this idea of perspective, putting things in space, making things look closer or farther away, depending on their size and angles. I think a lot of it too, being able to use these things was a way for other artists to flex on others, because you see it a lot happening, especially later into the Renaissance period. And finally, you have technology. You have muskets and firearms being made in Europe, as well as gunpowder to allow those things to work. And then nautical compasses and mechanical clocks, which allow people to travel better and easier, and also get an idea of where they are in space and time. You also have the printing press being made, and I've talked a little bit about the importance of literature and reading to culture, and this is no exception. We'll talk more about the significance of the printing press in Europe specifically, but just know it'll pop up later. And one final technology that came out of the Renaissance was cartography. And stay tuned, we'll talk about that in just a little bit.